101, take one.
Again, thank you for having us. This is really exciting for me. Can we start with just telling us, how did you first meet Dr. King and what were your first impressions?
You know, the first meeting was really indirect. I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, and most of our people had adjusted to this situation. Ministers reinforced the adjustment. Be good people, but don't fight for change, don't fight for power, because it met with such stiff resistance. So to see Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy and Reverend Shuttlesworth emerge as redefining the role of ministers was itself a source of relief. So we met them there. We began to follow them in that vein. I was arrested July 1960 with several classmates trying to use a public library. Little did I know he was aware of that. And then in '63 in Greensboro, North Carolina, at North Carolina A&T, we were involved in a major sit-in movement there. So when I first met him physically, I was coming to Atlanta to speak at Morehouse as a member of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. And he was coming to the airport with his group only to get his Nobel Prize. It was just a thrill to see him. He saw me, he called my name, Jesse. It threw me off. Hi, Sam. He was talking about Dr. Sam Proctor, who he knew at Boston University, and they were good friends. He began how things going in Greensboro, how things at A&T, how things at Bennett. So the fact that he was, because we had been on television quite a bit during that time, during the Greensboro struggle. So I met him in that sense. To me, it depicted how sensitive he was, how aware he was of our struggle. I remember Ernie Green talking about when they graduated from Little Rock Central, he was at the graduation. Not as a speaker, he was just there at the graduation. He was deeply immersed in the Southern struggle to end apartheid in the South. I remember the first time I was real close. We were in Selma. Reverend C.T. Vivian and I went by Miss Boynton's house where he was staying. He was lying in bed. He had by him Love, Power, and Justice by Paul Tillich, The Courage to Be by Paul Tillich, Nature and Destiny of Man by Niebuhr, and the Bible. I asked him about the books because I was in seminary at the time. He said, well, I read one fiction, one nonfiction book a week. He was deeply scholarly. As I often say to young people who catch on to that, I have their dream dimension of his life. Dr. King finished high school at 15. He finished Morehouse at 19. He finished seminary at 22, his PhD at 26. Deeply committed to scholarship. He knew the strong minds break strong chains. I would hear young people say, now, when did he become radical? To be in Montgomery, Alabama, a block from the Confederate Capitol and from the Confederate White House, and to call a boycott to dislocate that city in the South was a very radical move. When Rosa Parks was arrested, the bus driver was legally right. Ms. Parks was morally right. There was a sign above the driver's head that read, colored seat from the rear, whites from the front. Those who violate by law will be punished. And so to defy that law was radical. And there was someone who said, now that she has, the bus company wants to apologize, she said, no, until the sign comes down, until the wall comes down, nothing has happened. He saw beyond private pain to the issue of social justice. And it was significant. I asked Mrs. Parks one day to see how connected things are. I said, Mrs. Parks, why didn't you go to the back of the bus, given the fact that, everybody else did. If you stayed up there, you could be arrested, or you could be run over by the bus or something, beat by hostile forces. She said, I thought about going back, but I thought about Emmett Till. I couldn't go back. August 20th, 1955, Emmett Till was lynched. All that stuff was happening at the same time. So in the midst of lynching and very barbaric activity and hostile laws, he emerges out of that cauldron, calling for an unusual thing for the South, and the end to Confederate rule, a demand for social justice, a demand for one set of rules. So even, we must not underestimate just how militant the Montgomery bus boycott was as an action, a collective action that lasted for a year. And then not only did the action survive, but the law. Mrs. Parks and Reverend Dr. Attorney Fred Gray were testing the law of 54 to see if it were valid, the 54 Supreme Court decision. So she didn't just happen to sit down. She meant to sit down. She was willing to go to jail. It was a plan to bail her out. But those were very militant actions. And so every action he made for change had a certain edge of not adjustment, not resentment, but resistance and change.
As you got to know him personally, what surprised you about him as a person?
Well, just his energy level and his reading habits and his willingness to open up to other people, to staff members, and to let ideas flow. Will you agree with him or disagree? Or something he would just point blank, what do you see? His willingness to a kind of participatory democracy. He had a point of view, he had a conclusion, but that feature of him and his preparation, he usually Tuesday was kind of his off day. He spent Tuesday studying, reflecting upon what happened the last week and projecting. But he was quite sociable. I mean, he laughed a lot, with friends. What we call preacher jokes. So he was once a very personable guy. Many activists don't have much analysis. Many analysts don't have much action. He had the combination of action and analysis and preparation. He would say you must not have the paralysis of analysis. You can't just keep on talking. You have to act. But if you act without analysis, you don't know where you're going. And if you you see it, but you don't act, you can't get there. So he saw the combination that led to power, and that power led to change. There is a New South today, and there's in many ways a new America because Dr. King led the movement to pull down those walls. You could not have the Carolina Panthers and Atlanta Falcons. They couldn't have existed behind the Cotton Curtain because it would have been illegal for them to play together, stay together, sit in the fans together, in the stands together. You couldn't have had the Olympics in Atlanta behind the Cotton Curtain. South Carolina would not be the number one producer of tires in America today behind the Cotton Curtain. You wouldn't have Honda and Nissan and Toyota in the South behind the Cotton Curtain today. You couldn't have had Clemson playing Alabama, black quarterbacks in the South behind the Cotton Curtain. So in many ways, the whole South must attribute its growth and its removal of certain barriers, not to any Southern governor or in the Southern Center. All that was in Dr. King's watch. It's important to note that we not take for granted those changes, but the South, as we know it, was not always as it is today. And not only did it free black people, it freed so many white people. Jimmy Carter couldn't have come from Plains, Georgia, and gone to the White House behind the Cotton Curtain. George Bush couldn't have come from Odessa, Texas, to the White House behind the Cotton Curtain. Bill Clinton from Hope, Arkansas. Because so long as the curtain was there and the South was in the shadows, it was assumed that any Southerner was too racist, quote unquote, to lead the country. So Southern whites were, in some sense, regionalized and limited as well. When the curtain came down, and the wall and the bridge went up, it shed light on everybody. It's like the right to vote. Blacks have been denied the protected right to vote from states' rights since 1880. Well, white women couldn't serve on juries since 1967. 18-year-olds couldn't vote while serving in Vietnam. You couldn't vote on campuses. You couldn't vote bilingually. You couldn't get proportionality in delegate selection for conventions. All that stuff happens in the wake of the flood of Dr. King's sense of social justice and redemption.
Absolutely. You'd mentioned briefly about these preacher jokes. Do you remember any, or can you give us a feel for what it was like and the competitive nature of preachers when they get together?
I never sensed the competition, but guys just have fun as they express. Some ministers are could be comedians because they're public speakers and they develop punchlines to tell their stories. I don't remember this frankly specifically about him, but he was easy to laugh and go along with friends and favor.
He refers to his staff as a team of wild horses. There are a lot of strong personalities there. Can you talk about that and how his management style? How did he corral all you wild horses?
Jose was strong. Jose would go into a fire with gasoline clothes on. He was that kind of defiant figure, and sometimes boisterous. And we didn't know what Dr. King knew. I remember sometimes he would drink, but he was such a good guy. We all gravitated to him. When Jose was 15, put his age up to go to the war. His mother and father were blind. They'd never seen each other, and they'd never seen their children. And while in the war, he was in a foxhole. I think 7 or 8 people were killed. He survived. It affected how his sense of survival, his sense of justice. So he had that strong kind of something about him. Bevel was just creative. I mean, he would take any kind of risk. But Bevel could just like see things unfolding for him. He could just like, he could go to the point. And it was always so smart. Administrative type, a great balancing wheel. Reverend Abernathy was the rock that we all leaned on when things got rough. Dorothy Cotton was head of our political education, or voter education department it's called. So all these different, Reverend C.T. Vivian, the kind of theologian in the house. Bernard Lafayette, the nonviolent artist, really, theoretician and activist. So we would have the right to argue and take positions. And he would say 2 things. One, that we were a team of wild horses, and it was his job to take the energy and direct it. And sometime when the stuff would get hot on the inside of a stabbing, he would say, well, we reflect in here what's out there. We cannot corral ourselves, we cannot corral the community. And so he saw that in some perspective. The other thing he would say that he was the pilot of the plane, but we were the ground crew. Without the ground crew, the plane cannot go from port to port, from arrival to departure. It cannot have the mechanical dimensions. So he had an appreciation of the field crew. Because after all, the Sunday of the big march in Selma, Alabama, he was in his church preaching that morning. But James Orange, along with Bevel and along with John Lewis and Jose Williams, Cotton Reader, the field crew was on the ground. So he had a great appreciation of the many roles that many people play. And he saw himself as kind of guiding those forces. And he was more interested in building a kind of a tugboat as opposed to an ocean liner. He didn't want a big organization per se. He didn't want a membership organization so he could get bogged down and raise the members. It was not the big ocean liner. He wanted to have a strike force that go into a given town and raise the issues, expose the contradictions, and had the courage to fight. And so I remember him telling me one time that he did not want to build a big building and leave it as a monument, or didn't want to have a lot of money left. He felt that if any money were left, it would be a reflection on his leadership, that it was not about money. He believed that you should be materialistically minded enough to take care of basic essentials, but not mindless and materialistic and out for your stuff. He had that sense of his value. That's why when he won the Nobel Peace Prize, he gave money away to all other organizations, kept just a proportion for SCLC, because those were kind of his values.
I'd like to move to talk about coming up to Chicago. So after Selma, this move to Chicago and the housing the move to end slums and him moving up to Chicago. Can you talk about that and how the movement changed when it moved up here to Chicago and your role in that?
Well, when you came to Chicago, first of all, there was a big debate. Should we leave the South? Jose thought we never should have left the South. There was so much unfinished